A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Episode 4. My guest today is Gary Naylor. Gary is a reviewer of the performing arts, cricket, and football. In today's conversation, we spoke about the art of reviewing and criticism. Welcome, Gary.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Number 4 on the list. I feel like I'm at the start of a big story.
Well, we'll see how big the story gets. This is sort of if I find something to talk about and someone who's prepared to talk to me about it, then an episode happens. This is the working theory of this podcast.
Yeah, we're on the road to an epic. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, welcome. I want to talk to you because I've read your work, obviously, on cricket for a while. I used to read 99.94, and I read and then it moved to The Guardian, and I continue to read it there. I've read some of your work on covering the theatre. I find that, there aren't many people who will cover both the theatre and films and opera and the performing arts broadly, as well as sport. I think there used to be in an earlier generation, but that seems to have declined. Am I right or am I?
Well, I think so. If I can sort of puff up my chest and twirl my moustache and say, the great Neville Cardus, of course, he covered theatre, opera, and stuff like that, as well as cricket. And of course, I am not comparing myself to the doyen of cricket writers. And there are others. I think Michael Henderson always has an interest in opera and cricket. And there are other cricket writers who perhaps see the attractions of cricket in its long and engrossing format, particularly Test cricket and first class cricket and theatre, narrative arcs, the role of character and so on. But perhaps are not fortunate enough as I am, particularly with online, which does offer, of course, far more opportunities, and I might come back to that later, that they have the opportunity to write on both those broad areas. But I think there is a kind of overlap in terms of what excites a person and what engages a person between cricket and theatre. And many friends of mine who are cricket followers also attend the theatre on a fairly regular basis. So on the one hand, they do look like disparate subjects, but on the other hand, I feel that the way that they engage you, and indeed when you come to write about both of these fields, there's so much overlap that you don't really need to put your head in a different place. Funnily enough, one of the things that you do need to put your head in a slightly different place is when writing reviews of films and books, which are you would think would be quite similar to writing reviews of plays, but it's turned out, to me at least anyway, that they are quite different. But maybe we'll come to that later on.
How did you get involved with writing reviews? Have you always done that, like since school, or is it a recent thing?
In some ways I have, not exactly in terms of writing them, but certainly talking about it. You refer to school. When I was at school, my mother worked in a cinema. She used to give out the drinks in the intervals and the ice creams and all of that kind of stuff. Like she was in a kind of being played by Mia Farrow in a Woody Allen film in the 1970s or something. But because she handed out the tickets, she got a couple of comps, as they're called, complimentary tickets a week, which turned out to actually be a bit more than a couple. So what we were able to do, both my brothers and I, was spend quite a lot of our childhood in cinemas. And it was a small cinema in Liverpool, and in about 1974 or so, when I was 11, they split it into 3. And in those days, a night at the cinema really was a night at the cinema. You arrived about 6:50, 7 o'clock or something, and you saw a B movie, a support movie, and then you saw the main feature, which would begin at around 8:45 after the interval, and it would go on to about 10:15 or something like that. So you saw, and I saw a lot of movies, and I'll give you an example. I think I was there one evening, and I was there for one of these Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder kind of buddy movies that they made in the 70s, Silver Streak or something like that. But the support movie was Richard Pryor live at Sunset Strip, and I didn't know who Richard Pryor was, and I just went in sort of cold about 6:45 or something in the evening. There's only a handful of people in the cinema, and I've got Richard Pryor doing his Pryor on Fire stand-up routine. I'm about 14, and I go, bloody hell, what is this? So you got real surprises like that, particularly with the B movies. But what that gave, I think, and it's noticeable with both my brothers who go to theatre quite often themselves now, and I mean they see more bands and go to theatres than I do, and they also see a lot of movies, is that at quite a young age, we learn the ability to concentrate for long periods of time. So it's never been a problem, long 3.5-hour subtitled movies by Andrei Tarkovsky or something like that are never a problem for me, because I feel as though I was sort of acculturated to this approach of sitting in a darkened room and concentrating on the matter at hand for hours on end at a very early age, and I'm very grateful to have had that opportunity. So I was in cinemas from a very early age, and then a bit later on, as I particularly when I went to London and went to college, lived in a student house for a year, and we would spend hours and hours and hours talking about movies, talking about television programs. I mean, that was what we did for a large part of our time. So we'd be in the kitchen, and we'd get back from the union having had a few drinks or something at midnight, and you'd be making something to eat, frying something up or something, and somebody would walk in, and then we'd just start talking about sort of favourite sitcoms or something, and before you knew it, it was 3:30 in the morning, and you'd opened another bottle of wine. And so I'd always had that in me, talking about film and television, theatre to some extent. And so it's always been sort of in my blood to when you finish watching something, to roll it over in your mind and talk about it further with anyone else who's seen it. And then I think the final part of the kind of foundation, if you like, of how I became a reviewer, before I actually wrote my first review, was that I've always been a bit of a journalism junkie, and for a long time I had on subscription lots and lots of magazines. I'm talking The Cricketer, I'm talking Private Eye, I'm talking The Atlantic, I'm talking Pro Cycling, Cycling Monthly, When Saturday Comes. At times I've been a subscriber to The Economist, the London Review of Books, just loads and loads and loads of magazines, because I've always been someone who reads journalism. My rule I had for a while, and if you want to send yourself mad, have a rule like this, was that when I was reading the old Guardian in the 80s, the old broadsheet Guardian in the 80s, if there was a headline I was interested in, then I would read the article. And if it was a headline that I wasn't interested in, I needed to know a bit more about it, so I had to read the article. So that gets you into reading newspapers cover to cover every day, which obviously they were not designed to do, nor is it a way to stop yourself going mad. But the big influence on reviewing was reading The New Yorker. And if anyone is listening to this and has any aspirations to writing in any capacity, anywhere, online or elsewhere, even just writing your own diary or for your own pleasure, then reading The New Yorker is just about the best grounding you can get. The variety of subject matter, the quality of the writing, the use of language, exposition, carrying argument, all of that. I think The New Yorker is the best at all of those things, and obviously its art section is a particularly important part of the magazine.
I started reading the New Yorker after I went to graduate school, and I'm always struck by how expertly composed everything in it is, whether it's thousands of words or whether it's a 500 word short observation about a specific short event. One thing that strikes me, given that we're talking in 2019, is that your formative experiences were all in print, and your habits of reading and habits of observing developed in an era before the internet.
Yes.
Does that is that do you find that to be significant in the way you approach reviewing? Whether it's reviewing the fourth day of a test match, or a school. I know that you review school productions as well as professional production.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an accident of age, really, as much as anything else. I mean, I'm 56, so until I was in my mid-40s, the internet wasn't really a player. But quite early on, because I had a computer on my desk and I was working in a university, in a media school in a university, it was not a kind of cheat, if you like, for us to be looking at the internet and monitoring news websites and reading stuff, because it was in the early 90s, it was literally developing every day. So we had to stay abreast of that. So I probably spent more time at work legitimately reading newspapers online and stuff like that than most other people. Quite early on, I began to think about the difference between online writing and print form writing, and I've written some pieces a few years ago at 99.94 about different ways of accessing cricket media, and a big game changer for me, as I'm sure you know, was the Guardian's over by over coverage, which allowed us to follow the progress of test matches in particular, but ODIs as well, on our computers with an over by over update from the likes of Rob Smythe and Lawrence Booth and Andy Bull originally, and then later it spread to football, and you've got the likes of Scott Murray doing it at football. And Rob is, I'm proud to say, Rob is a friend, and we've had lots of kind of conversations about the differences of online writing and print writing, and just what makes the online experience different. And I think Rob is the master of being able to write with the immediacy you need for that kind of online writing, and be able to capture an event as it's happening. He's also masterful in the form of the longer form of online writing, where he brings in links, he brings in references, he very much is aware of the fact that a person is reading this, they are reading it on a screen, and that they can link out at any time. There was, I think, back in the early days of Guardian Unlimited, there was a thing that did the rounds saying, write it unless you can link it, in which case link it. And Steve Busfield, who was at Wired and was at the Guardian for a while as well, he's very good on the differences between kind of online writing and print form writing. I think to some extent, with the advent of and the kind of ubiquity of broadband and of handheld devices and people reading stuff on their phones, and the bus stops and they simply sort of click their phone to their home screen and then get off the bus and then maybe pick up the article again when they get home or something. I think some of that has the differences have gone, but I do think that with online writing there is a greater immediacy. Maybe it's just a kind of illusion, but because people are looking at a bright screen rather than a passive page, because there's often adverts that are around it, or there are distractions as well on a screen which you don't get on a printed page, then I think there is a kind of obligation on the online writer to be crisper, to be sharper, and I think in some ways to be even more subjective, even more kind of forceful. If you're saying something online, say it. Don't shilly-shally. But the other side of that coin is, of course, all the poison and all the partisanship. You have to decide, are you going to be part of that? In which case, a kind of Piers Morgan type character, or are you going to step aside and are you going to say, look, I'm putting my work there. These are my thoughts. You certainly at liberty to comment on them if you wish, because screens are always interactive, or should always be interactive. But if you don't like it, then fine. But this is me.
Fascinating that you bring that up, because this notion of live writing and sort of having to think on your feet, we associate that with interviewers, and debaters. But I think it has sort of acquired a role in the over-by-over coverage or the minute-by-minute coverage in the football, or even in the ball-by-ball coverage, like what Cricinfo and a few other sites have. Which I was reading a couple of your reviews, and in one of your reviews you have this line which I really enjoyed. So I'm going to read it out.
Okay, thank you.
You say, in any opera asks us questions about where to direct our gaze, what to listen to and what to merely hear, how to interpret music, movement, and libretto's creation of meaning, what to sift from the sensory overload for processing as the show speeds on. And it seemed to me that is applicable to a lot of reviewing, and especially today, where a lot of reviewing is either live or quasi-live because of how everything gets shrunk and people move on to the next thing so fast.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right, and thank you for the kind words about that. Of course, inevitably, I'd forgotten that I'd written that because you write it so quickly, and it's gone. But I think it's important. I suspect I wrote that after I had interviewed a German woman called Julia Burbach, and she is a director, a young up-and-coming director who has done some work at the Royal Opera House, and we talked about the different elements of opera and how they come together, and I was talking about the kind of subjective experience of how that's all processed in the audience. And of course, lurking in my background, I've got sort of little bits of kind of French theory of the death of the author and Roland Barthes, right, and some of that stuff, but a lot of that is forgotten. But every now and again, it kind of pops into my mind, and so my writing is not academic, but it is informed a little bit by that previous life I had as an academic, and I think that it amuses me, and I think it helps me make points. So I hope that the reader gets it as well. But I think it's particularly. I think you're absolutely right. You have to decide what you're looking at, whether you're in the stalls at the Royal Opera House and there's a chorus of 50 or 60 serfs on stage for Boris Godunov, and you've got Bryn Terfel singing in front, and you've got some kind of element of caprice going on in the corner between two would-be lovers all at the same time, and you're looking at the surtitles because they're singing in Italian or something. And some of that's similar to when you're at Lord's and you're in the media centre and you're looking out and you've got the pavilion in front of you, you've got the action in the middle, but you've got sort of half an eye on what the crowd are doing and a piece of fielding over there, and have they moved an extra slip in. And in one sense, this is a challenge, but in another sense, it's very satisfactory, because if you have eyes to see, you've got all of this stuff going on, but then your challenge as a reviewer is, and you have to do these things either immediately, the extraordinary way that the best of the minute by minute writers and the over by over writers, and it's not just at the Guardian, of course, lots of outlets have and platforms have adopted this now. The way the best of them capture a narrative and capture the atmosphere and all that stuff going on. As a reviewer, you've got to move quite quickly, and you've got to make some decisions about what you're going to watch, and then how you're going to bring that to the readers. Often no more than 12 hours, maybe 16 hours later, because these reviews have to be written quite quickly. And if you're not already formulating your thoughts, if you're not already deciding what the themes are, what the important elements of the production in an opera or even in more of a straight play, what you're going to focus on, then you're going to end up with a pretty wishy-washy. You're going to end up with a rambling review, and nobody wants to read that. They want to read reviews that say, this is what the play is about, this is what's good about it, this is what's not so good, and here's why you should think about investing 15 quid going to see it.
I presume that when you're reviewing plays or the opera or something, you're writing for an audience and your readers. The presumption is that the readers have not yet seen the play, right?
Yes.
Whereas when you're covering a test match or the World Cup semi-final or whatever it is, then you're writing essentially for readers who have watched the game. Right?
I would say not always. You're absolutely right in that your review of a theatre piece, it's a press night, it's early in the run, and the whole idea of it is that readers read it, and the reason that you get press tickets is because it's a way of getting that play or that production into the public domain, and people will read that and think, oh, I quite fancy that, and go along and see it. So it's very much on your mind as a reviewer that the reader has not seen the production. When you're writing about a cricket match, when I'm doing either my kind of final over of the day, or I'm writing a more of a straight report, I have the view that I probably think at least half of my readers will not have seen the day's play. Certainly not all of it. And maybe that's me being old-fashioned again, because having grown up in a day where the paper would drop through the letterbox, you would pick up the paper and you would read about what happened at the test match the day before, or even online when I'm reading the likes of Paul Edwards in Cricinfo, when he's writing a county report from Worcester, and he's waxing lyrical, he's bringing in poetic allusions, and he's bringing in the history. The readers won't have been at Worcester and won't have, in the main, been watching the single fixed camera stream that the BBC use. Yeah. So I think most of the time, even when I'm writing about cricket, my presumption is that my putative reader is someone who has not seen all of the day's play that I've been privileged to see, but still has an informed knowledge. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. A long time ago, I wrote a piece about VVS Latchman, and I said, my favourite player. And in writing that, I was trying to capture his extraordinary capacity to watch the ball all the way onto the bat, and then at the very last minute just break the wrists one way or break the wrists the other way, and so on, and that sort of beautiful fragility he had in his game, which led to that beautiful balance and everything else. Now, my assumption is that people reading that will have seen VVS Latchman bat, but perhaps they haven't looked at him quite as closely as I had done over the previous 12 months, or perhaps they haven't seen some of the comparisons that I was bringing in, comparing him to other batsmen, maybe comparing him to Sachin or to Dravid or his other contemporaries, Sehwag or someone. But so you kind of have an idea about the reader, and you kind of have an idea that they know that they are informed, but definitely haven't got as much knowledge as you have as the writer, because that's your privilege as the writer. But the great thing about online is that they're going to come back to you either through Twitter and social media or perhaps in comment sections, as they often do, and say, but hey, had you thought of this? Or what about this comparison, and so on. And some of the friendships and some of the best stuff that I've read online have been struck up by readers coming back to me and saying, yes, but there are other things, and there's this or there's that. And then they really add to the piece, and it becomes a living and breathing thing. You know, we're very lucky, those of us with platforms. You know, you've got Cricinfo, I have 99.94, and The Guardian, and Broadway World for my theatre writing. We're very privileged to have those platforms, but that doesn't mean to say we have a kind of monopoly of knowledge or insight. And so when readers come back and contact you, I think it's a real pleasure. Of course, I might be thinking otherwise if I were a football writer, because that's much more tribal and you get horrible stuff coming back at you. But with cricket, certainly, I've been fortunate in my cricket writing and in my theatre writing is that for every snarky put down I've had 1,000 more constructive and I won't say complimentary because that sounds a bit condescending, but constructive and positive contributions from readers, and I'm delighted to keep receiving them now.
Would you say reviewing is a constructive enterprise? Or is it a form of scrutiny?
I think I've thought quite a bit about this, because I think there's an element of it being parasitic. We can't review something that the creatives haven't sweated blood over for years and years and years. And this is something that I feel very strongly all the time. Maybe you can call it a certain humility if you want to, but I'm always aware when the lights go down in the theatre that what I am seeing is the product of years and years and years of work, from the training, from the selection to get into drama school, from the writing and all that went into that, for the directing, the rehearsals, everything else. And so you give it that respect. And so I hardly ever write wholly negative reviews. I hardly ever see anything that warrants it. I've seen one or two pieces that warrant it. But you have to give that respect, that nobody goes out to make a bad piece of theatre. Nobody goes out to hit their first ball in the air to extra cover and walk back to the pavilion. But sometimes things don't work. You know, sometimes, and you have to be true to your reader. You have to call it as you see it. But so, and the first, in one sense, it's parasitic, but in the other sense, as a reviewer, you are the bridge, both to the public at large, who may choose to, read your words and then decide whether to go and see that particular production of Three Sisters or whatever it might be that you're reviewing. So you owe them the dignity of your honesty. And so you do see websites where almost everything gets 4 and 5 stars, but there are lots of links where you can buy tickets and the website gets a cut of the ticket price going through that particular portal. Fortunately, the website and the editor that I work with has never lent on us in any sense with our reviewing. We are entirely it's entirely our own decision how we review shows and what ratings we give and everything else. So I think that kind of editorial distance is great for us reviewers. But yeah, I think we add to it in that sense. But I think we're also a bridge back to the production team and the cast, because something which is very different about theatre reviewing, if we compare it to film reviewing, is that casts and creatives, directors, lighting, set designers, and so on, they're seeing our reviews in real time. So you've got to be aware of that, I think, as a reviewer. If you're reviewing a film, the film is done, and whether the directors or the actors ever read the reviews is I think open to question. Some clearly do, but I guess a lot of them are on to their next project or even the project after that. So what, as far as they're concerned. But the actors and the directors and the creatives, and we know this because they do come back to us on occasion, they're reading reviews at, say, midday the day after a press night, and they're back on stage at 7:30 that evening. So you've got an obligation to be fair to them, and you've also got an obligation to understand that your words do matter. And I sometimes have to pinch myself a little bit when I get some lovely comments back, as you sometimes do, from creatives saying, oh, you really understood our piece, or thank you so much for your positive review. And I'm thinking of myself sitting at my desk here, just punching keys on a keyboard as fast as I can to get the piece done. And I enjoy it and I think about it, but I'm not aware of that kind of weight until it's explained to me again that it's not like the old days of the notices in the New York Times could close a show on Broadway, but it does matter what us reviewers say. And sometimes for shows in London, on the Fringe, and there's a fantastic Fringe in London, there's so much good work around, but there might only be 3 or 4 of us reviewers reviewing a show. So you're 25% of what's going to be in the public domain outside of sort of Twitter comments and stuff like that. So you've got an obligation to be fair and to put some thought into it and to produce a review that contributes to the production from your particular perspective, that of the bridge between the show itself and the public at large. So, although I write these reviews quickly and I don't make notes during a play, I do think about it. Often I've got the review pretty much straight in my head on the way home, riding the motorbike between the traffic lights. I've worked out what I'm going to say and everything else. And the worst thing I would want in terms of feedback as a reviewer from a show is that you didn't care about it. If someone reads the review and they've been in the show, or a member of the public are reading the review and they think, well, you didn't care about that, you were just complacent, you just said this is good, this is not so good, and that's it, then that would be the worst thing for me. I don't mind someone disagreeing with me or agreeing with me. What I don't want is someone to be ambivalent about my review.
Often you hear cricketers, and they'll say, oh, I don't read the papers, I don't like what they say and stuff like that. And I think sometimes writers, and especially with blogging and the internet, it's sort of become a much more democratic thing. I think mainly for the better, though perhaps in some ways also for the worse. All these players, they're going to read your review, and then next week they're going to play again. And the next week they're going to play the next test match or the next series and so on. And so it seems to me that, the reviewer definitely has some obligation towards, the performers, whether it is in the competitive setting of a test match or whether it is, in a scripted setting of a play, but so then if you turn to sort of the other obligation of the reviewer, which is to the reader, then sort of sport brings in several things which sort of increasingly bother me. One is that it seems to me that there seems to be a tacit agreement between reviewers of the day's play or writers and their audience. There seems to be in some cases, a tacit partisan agreement between them. There's an expectation from the readers that the reviewer will support India or England or write from an Indian point of view or an English point of view. These things didn't used to be the case as explicitly as they are now. Are they? I mean, in the sense that, there's the partisanship has begun to be commodified, it seems to me. Is that a fair reading, or do you see it differently?
I see it slightly differently. I think I don't deny that there are partisan.
I mean, in football especially, this is far more advanced, admittedly, than it is in cricket, right? I mean, the big publications in Europe basically cater to the supporters of the biggest clubs, and they commit more resources to writing about the big clubs than about the middle clubs or the lower ranked clubs and so on, right?
Well, you're absolutely right. I don't deny that at all. But I think we have to bear in mind is that these are commercial concerns.
Yes.
And so it's always been the case, and I'll give you an example in a moment. It's always been the case that commercial concerns like newspapers and television channels and so on are they're going to, in the main, not solely, but in the main, they're going to aim to maximize their income.
Yes.
And as part of that, they're going to look to where the clicks are online and where the readership is and the sales are in print. And so you're always going to get that bias. So I'll give you an example. When I was growing up in the 70s and into the early 80s, growing up in Liverpool, Liverpool Football Club were European champions in 1977 and again in 78, and they were the leading club in 70s into the 80s, and then Everton won the championship in 85 and 87, what's now the Premier League, so on. But if you were looking at the newspapers in the Northwest editions of the tabloid press, like the Daily Mirror and the Sun and so on, they were Manchester based. Their journalists they were published in Manchester. The printing presses were in Manchester. Their offices were in Manchester. Their journalists had Manchester connections. And so it was full of stuff about Manchester United, who at that point were a kind of fair to middling top-ranked side. Yeah. And I remember sort of a light bulb moment going off for me, thinking, why have we got yet another interview with a Manchester United player in the Daily Mirror or something? And the reason was because it was journalists in pubs in Manchester talking to their contacts. So, and also, Manchester United then as now has had the bigger supporter base. So you're always going to get that. And I think we can to some extent separate different layers of media. And so, even the less commercially oriented press, the Guardian has just turned around I don't know how many years, at least 10 years of historic losses into turning a profit now, and they've had to make a lot of compromises and do quite a lot of things in order to achieve that goal. But they've always had a more comprehensive view, but even they are, spend a lot of time on what my brother calls the Champions League.
They're a not-for-profit enterprise.
Well, they're run by a trust, yes, but they still,
they have to break even.
Yeah. But the other newspapers and so on, and I think you just kind of accept that, and it was always the case. I think what the advent of online writing, it's done kind of two things, really. I think it's given a platform to the full-on kind of partisan, the kind of fan sites, the kind of Reddit type things where it's fans of a particular, and it gets very tribal and so on. So they've had their kind of they've found a home. And the other home you've had, and I would put myself in this bracket as a writer, and there are others, some of whom, I might put someone like George Dobell in there, writing for Cricinfo, where I think there is much more freedom. I mean, I don't get paid in the main. I get a little bit of money here and there for my writing, but it's not my main source of income by a million miles. And if I didn't get any income from writing, I literally wouldn't notice it because it's so little. But it's nice that it's there, but I don't really notice it. So I'm beholden to no one. So I write about what interests me, and my job is to make the reader, or to invite the reader to be interested in the same things in which I write. So I don't have any commercial imperative in any of my writing at all, and that's a great freedom. And I remember a bit of name dropping here, talking to Lawrence Booth, and him saying that this is a difference between the more blog oriented writer and the more journalism oriented writer, is that the blogger, coming from the word weblog, a log of your activities on the web, has got this kind of freedom. So if I think about online media, I mean, if I were a player, or if I was reading about cricket media or theatre media, I would think of it, an old style wireless radio where you would get lots of white noise and you get, and then you come across a station and it would come clear and you would hear them, and then you come across a station and you would hear them. I think if I were a player, I would think of media and media outlets as a bit like one of those radio one of those old school radios. There's a lot of white noise out there. There's a lot of stuff that's not very well written, or is not particularly insightful, or is partisan, or whatever it might be, and you can just screen that out as white noise. And then every now and again you'll come across, you'll come across a station, and there'll be some of them to which you might have an affinity, that you will have empathy with, and you'll want to read those writers, and you want to stick with those stations, or you'll want to hear those podcasts. And there are others that you will disagree with, and then you'll have to decide if you've got time and energy to continue to read or to listen to those as well. But I think players or any practitioners who are being written about by critics or reviewers, and there's a slight difference between those two, I think, but only slight, to ignore them all may be kind of a nice short circuit, because you don't have to read stuff about how you're not worth your place because you've had one bad innings and all that kind of overreaction and immediacy. But on the other hand, I think you would be missing out on some perceptive observation, because something that I think is very fundamental that we haven't talked about so far, and I don't think gets talked about enough in cricket, and to some extent I don't think gets talked about enough in theatre, is the experience of watching cricket or sport, and the experience of watching theatre or film is very different to the experience of making it. And I think we notice this when ex-players move across into the media, and they haven't really been watching cricket. They haven't been sitting in the stands. They haven't gone through the days that we've gone through, and enjoyed some of them and enjoyed others less. And even if they are watching the game, you sometimes see them up on the balconies watching the game, their thinking is different, because they're either preparing for their own contribution as a batsman, or they're thinking about what they're going to be doing when they're going out into the field, or they're reflecting on their performance within the game and how they could improve it. And I think one of the things that's been lost from a lot of sports broadcasting, and one of the things that in theatre reviewing makes a difference, is that part of our job as the non-professionals, as the non-practitioners, is to bring back that experience of watching a sport or watching a production play out in front of you. Some of this is very what you might call hygiene factors. Lots of us reviewers get so annoyed when we cannot hear the actors singing because the music is too loud. Over and over again you get in theatres, and we put in reviews, and when we get a chance to talk to them, we say to them, just have the music director or the director sit at the back of the theatre in the tech rehearsal and see if they can hear the words being sung over the music being played. Because if they can't, turn the music down or turn the mics up, but don't have us fighting to hear what's being sung because the music is too loud. Now, I think that's a kind of hygiene factor of them not spending enough time watching productions because they're spending all their time creating them. I understand, but we feel that, and we're obligated to say that to our audience of readers. And likewise, when it comes to cricket, for example, and coaches do this to some extent in cricket, if you're seeing, as I was seeing all through the Ashes, that the likes of Jason Roy are not lining the ball up and they're going at it with hands rather than with feet, then they're nicking off and they're hitting the ball in the air because their balance is wrong. We can see that because we're watching hours and hours and hours of this on a regular basis, whereas he's not watching it. And then when he's in the pavilion and he's reflecting on his performance, maybe he has some video. That's a very different experience to us who are writing about the action, saying that when Jason Roy came into bat, he got to 20 and then he was out because of this technical flaw. Now, you might say, well, that's the coach's job and so on. Well, if it is a coach's job, why do so many flaws in batsmen and to a lesser extent bowlers, bowling no balls, for example, why do they persist? Why do they keep coming? I'm sceptical about whether they are being told it by their coaches or whether they're being told to play your natural game. And if we go into a theatre context, are directors really telling actors in certain scenes that, you know, you need to ease back on the emotion here, that the message is going to be stronger if you say it more quietly, not quite as loudly, not quite as if you're in a soap opera on a television, that you're in a theatre, capacity 150, they can hear you all around this small auditorium.
So I do want to move to sort of the last thing I had in mind, which is your work with the commentary. But first, I have to ask you this: does a spectator have a right to be pleased at the end of a day's play, or is it part of sport to have, you know, unsatisfactory days sometimes?
Well, I mean, sport is called unscripted theatre. One of the reasons we like sport, or certainly, I mean, it's changed a little bit with these kind of, you know, reality TV style scripted reality, and you know, I would call, you know, the WWE, the World Wrestling, part of that kind of thing, and to some extent events that support sport, like the draft and things like that we had in the 100, and they have in American football and so on, are much more. There's more of a guarantee, if you like. But I think when it comes to the unscripted drama, the reward we get is first and foremost the fact that the outcome is not determined, that we don't know. Norwich City will beat Manchester City 3-0. There will be an umpiring error that nobody realised until 2 hours after the event that awarded an extra run to Ben Stokes, which got England into a super over, which led to a tie and a countback. We don't know any of that, but that's all part of the excitement, and it's human fallibility, and it's people rising to the occasion and other people crumbling under the pressure. We have that, and you know, and every now and again, you know, Usain Bolt runs that 100 meters in Beijing, and I remember watching it and thinking, did that just happen? And then they reviewed the race again, and it did happen. And then I went to bed and I woke up and I thought, did he really run it in 9:58 and so on? And those events are all stronger because we don't know if they're coming. We have no guarantees in sport, and it's my belief that even certainly in cricket and to some extent in other sports, even on the surface of some of the dullest days, if the struggle is keenly fought, if at the end of 90 overs a side have made 230 for 2 in a county championship game, if that has been tight cricket the whole way through with quarter neither asked nor given, I mean, I like it. What I find less attractive, and you know, there's a test match going on now in Ranchi, is it? And you know, India are absolutely hammering an understrength, ill-prepared and unsuited South African side. And you know, one admires Rohit Sharma, this late bloom in his red ball career, fantastic. But I'm not sure I want to see a side winning by an innings and 200 runs over and over again.
Yeah, no, I mean, the South Africa this series have appeared to be sort of Kagiso Rabada and 10 other guys. You know? I mean, it's when he's bowling, it's a different game, and when everybody else is involved, it's a completely different game.
I think we'll see a different South Africa when England play. You know, Philander's obviously better in his home conditions. I like Ngidi and so on. But yeah, so it's a bit like that with I think with any sport that I'm watching. There is no right to be entertained, to be satisfied. There is the expectation that if you put in your own thinking, your own willingness to engage with what might at times be inverted commas challenging material, slow days in cricket, or a football match which is a midfield struggle rather than with lots of chances, that you'll get something from it. But every now and again, it's just a Keystone Cops show, and the passes go a bit awry, and there's wides bowled, there's poor shots played, there's drop catches. Even that can be quite fun, to be honest. So, and
the other day there was this game, and I think one of Manchester City, I think they were 5-0 up after 18 minutes. And they'd had like 6 shots. And now 6 shots in 18 minutes is a lot, but 5 goals in 6 shots is unusually efficient. It almost never happens, and that's basically it's ended the game. But what I've sort of trying to tease out is the difference between being a spectator and being a customer, and there's sort of an element in a lot of entertainment and in a lot of the ways in which sport is produced nowadays, and the 100 and the IPL and all are part of this, is that they are sort of catering to some expectation of being they're catering to customers rather than spectators.
Well, I remember reading a piece, probably in the New Yorker, it might have been somewhere else, probably 10 or more years ago, and it was charting the success of the NBA, and it said that, I think it was in the 80s or something, the NBA was in danger of sliding to 4th in the big 4 American sports, which are NFL, which is number 1, MLB baseball, National Hockey League, and the NBA. And they took a decision that they were going to create stars, and the star that was going to be the star player who was going to drive this way of putting the NBA back into its position in the mainstream, towards the top of the mainstream American sports, was Michael Jordan. So you've got Jordan 23 and the Air Jordans and appearing in movies and stuff like this. And I think this is one of the ways in which, and you see it in the marketing of the IPL and the 100 and other sports as well. Football less so, but you do see it a little bit.
You see it with Kohli and Ben Stokes.
Because what you're doing is you're saying, even if the game itself, in a kind of traditional sense, is a walkover, or if it's a slow attritional struggle, hey, you've got your show because you've got a chance to see your hero, you've got a chance to see the superstar. You've got the name at the top of the bill, above the title in the theatre or as a film, And I think that a lot of sports looked at the NBA there and realized in the emerging, changing media landscape that they need stars to drive exactly what you say, because there are times when the unscripted theatre of sport is not going to deliver, and therefore you have to have other things, and the main other thing you can have is the glitter of star quality.
That's actually, I hadn't thought of that. The sort of stardom is sort of a insurance policy almost.
I think it is, and wherever Virat goes, people will come, and you'll always have that. And I mean, to some extent, sport has always had that, but it's kind of emerged from the people.
Movies.
So movies have had the star system since at least the kind of studios began
for 100 years almost now.
Yeah, for 100 years or more. And in sport, you had stars like Muhammad Ali emerging and George Best emerging, but they emerged really as much by chance and by force of their own personalities. It wasn't quite the collaboration that we see now.
They're sort of more. I mean, Ali and Best and Pele and these are sort of folk heroes, right? They're not really. They're not really productions.
Yes, and I think that production is an interesting word, because I think it is a partnership between the sport, its administrators, and the individuals themselves, for them to become, as they are often said, it's an interesting way in which the language is developed but not developed. They're called icons of the sport, and there is an iconography attached to them because they are the images that are, inverted commas, worshipped by the fans. So I think that's what's different, and that's what gets you out of that danger of 3 IPL games, or in this country it would be 300 games, 1 walkover, 1 rained off, and 1 120 all out plays 95 all out.
I mean, I just recently I was really struck by this. The Times of India, which is sort of an old establishment newspaper back in the day, and now they bought a tabloid, and arguably they've become tabloidized.
Yeah. It's a familiar.
But the other day they had a news item, and this news item was essentially a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Kohli in a grocery store in New York City.
Yeah.
And that was it. Nothing happened in the grocery store.
Yeah.
It was just, they went to a store. That was the story.
We had 10 years of this with David Beckham, and we still get it now.
That's an incredible thing, isn't it? I mean,
well, it is an incredible thing, but the reason they print it is because people will click on it and people will buy newspapers as a result. And you quite rightly took us back to the Hollywood, the star system of Hollywood. And, I started off talking about my mother working in a cinema. She was a big fan of films. So in the 1950s, she bought all those film magazines, some of which you could, in Liverpool, you could get them direct from America because of the ships coming in. So, she had Photo Play and all of these, and Marilyn Monroe with the glamour shots and all of that touched up photography, and Rita Hayworth and all of this kind of stuff. And they were her idols. So there's kind of nothing new in this insatiable appetite that the public has for its stars and for its personalities. And Virat knows that the game and knows it's going to be played that way, and to some extent he profits from it. There's some concern in this country now, not I think unwarranted, that Meghan Markle, the wife of Prince Harry, she's the Duchess of, is it Cambridge? No, I can never work out what titles the royals have got. Anyway, she's Meghan Markle, and there's a lot of concern that she is not finding it easy to deal with the kind of tabloid attention. And, some might say that's the Faustian deal. You choose to marry a British royal, you choose to have the British press following you around, and they're certainly less aggressive and intrusive than they were before Diana in 1997. But I can understand why that's a tough gig to have, and why being in that focus 24/7, and I'm sure Kohli and Dhoni and their close family have it as well. There are the rewards, but I can understand why they want to turn a television off sometimes, if you like, or turn the cameras off sometimes and just go about their business. But this is where we are, and it seems, having been around for as long as it has, it's something that's kind of deep-seated in human psyche, that we want to have our icons, we want to have our heroes, and we want to know about our heroes. And a significant number of people want to know that their heroes have feet of clay. So, what have they been doing? Where have they been doing shady things? And what are they involved? The gossipy stuff. It's not going to go away anytime soon.
I want to sort of take you as a last part of this conversation to your work with Guerilla Cricket, because that is live, but that is also uniquely collaborative. Whereas all your other reviewing and all of my other reviewing is an individual, is a solitary enterprise. Right?
Yes.
I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, it's interesting that you set it in that context, because it is something that we're very much aware of. I've been doing, I think I started with Test Match Sofa more or less exactly 10 years ago. I think the Bangladesh tour for England in 2009 was my first. And it is a collaborative venture. It's collaborative both in terms of being on the screen or behind the mics, where we have 3 commentators, but it's also collaborative in terms of its production, making sure that you arrive on time, that we've got enough people to be able to make it all happen, doing the support work, sometimes with podcasts or with some of the marketing efforts and writing support pieces and so on. So it is more collaborative. As to how I feel about it, I enjoy much of the collaborative dimension to it. What surprises me and continues to surprise me is that I must have worked with easily 100, probably more than that, fellow commentators at Guerilla Cricket over the last 10 years, often at extremely antisocial times of the day. An India test will start at 4 a.m. And so, a Perth test starts at 3 a.m. The overnight Australia tests start 11:30 p.m. our time. And so you're often tired. You're often done a day's work beforehand. Sometimes you've got a day's work coming up. But we all generally get on occasionally, because you only attract people who are opinionated, because otherwise why would you have the ego or the commitment, enthusiasm to put your words out onto the internet. So you're going to get people who have strong opinions, and sometimes those opinions vary. But I think almost entirely the love of the game and the respect you have for each other comes through. And at its best, it really flies, because senses of humor mesh, interests mesh, and you get a really freewheeling product which is based on cricket but not solely concerned with cricket. And I'm very lucky to count many of the commentators amongst my friends, and we often, in the green room, such as it is, the kitchen that we have there when we're off mic, we're more often than not actually we're talking about movies, or we're talking about bloody Brexit or whatever it might be, and we enjoy each other's company. But it's a good job, because it's kind of 5 o'clock in the morning. We're all shivering a bit cold. We're on our 3rd cup of coffee in the last hour, and we've still got a couple of hours of commentary to go. So it's a good job that we do get on.
It must be a very different job, sort of trying to be part of a collective mind, isn't it?
It is, because it's more of a conversation. You have to listen and you have to react as well as spontaneously create. But that can be some of the best fun that you have, because the energy goes higher and higher as a result, and you make each other laugh, and you go off on riffs and so on. And I remember in the days of Test Match Sofa, Dan Norcross and I were commentating, and it was one of those matches, I think, where I think it was AB de Villiers was on his way to hit an 11 sixes in a 40 ball 100, and I think I was on ball by ball and Dan was doing the summarising, and I think I was getting to say, oh, that's gone miles, it's up in the air, it's going towards deep mid wicket, and it's 6 more. And Dan was convulsing in laughter, because I could summon zero enthusiasm to see yet another ball pitched on a length that AB was smacking over the fence. And the more deadpan I got, the more he was laughing and coming back to me, which made me even more deadpan. And so it became a kind of double act. And fortunately, AB de Villiers, our straight man in this comedy routine, kept hitting the sixes, so I was able to go deeper and deeper, and Dan was able to go higher and higher. Now, you can't do that when you're writing a report or a final over, or you're looking back on AB de Villiers' career, because it was the two of us picking up a vibe and running with it. And when it's at its best, that's what Guerilla Cricket can do, and that's what the collaborative process can do. It takes 240s and makes 100 out of them.
Finally, do you need to want to be a writer in order to be a writer, or do you need to be interested in the theater or in movies or in cricket or in football to be a writer? Which is the necessary thing, and which is the which is, is which is the chicken and which is the egg, just to put it very, very clumsily.
Yeah, so I'll take you back to how I made a what you might call a proper start. I've been as a writer is that I've been sending little quips into the Over by Over and getting sort of Rob Smythe or Lawrence would just publish, and Gary Naylor makes a point, la di da da di dum, and they were the kind of throwaway quips you do when you're sitting watching the television and you turn to someone next to you, say, hasn't he got a funny haircut or something like that. But I was working in a university in the media school, and one of my colleagues said, do you want to, you go to the theatre with your kids, do you want to write a review for the website that I'm editor of? And I was absolutely flattered and delighted to be asked. And so my first review was of Pinocchio at a theatre about 10 minutes walk from where I am sitting now, where I used to take my kids, and indeed they did theatre school there on a Saturday morning. And I wrote a review of a kid's version of Pinocchio. There was about 40 of us in the audience on a Sunday afternoon. I absolutely loved it. What I realised then, at the age of 45, 46 or whatever I was then, is that I had found something that I think everybody needs. And perhaps I was quite late coming to it, because I had found a creative outlet. I'd always been surrounded by creative people, and I've been interested, as I say, in movies, in theatre, in reading books and all of it, and then talking about it. But I'd never been creative myself. I can't draw, I can't paint, I take world's worst photographs. I've got no interest in making a movie or anything like that, but I love the company of people who do. But I had not found my creative outlet until I started to write reviews, and then subsequently, or around the same time, started to write in longer formats than mere quips about cricket at 99 point, the Googly initially, and then on to 99.94. And I think, coming back to your question, the chicken or the egg, is that I think everybody needs to find their creative outlet, and for some people that will be kind of do it yourself and wallpapering. For others it will be writing their own secret diary. For others still it may be knitting, embroidery, cooking is a big one. But
Gardening.
I think everybody gardening, everyone needs to start with a blank sheet of paper, or a lawn, or a blank wall, or whatever it might be, and then do something which changes it, and then they feel a sense of ownership, or a sense of having made their mark. And I think everyone needs that. Sometimes it's their children, because they see themselves in their children. These can be everyday things. They can be things we do even without knowing. But I think once I started to write reviews, I knew, and then write about cricket, that I knew then that I had found this creative outlet. I'd found that beautiful combination. I'd found what I wanted to say and a platform for saying it. And it changed my life. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. It absolutely changed my life, because instead of spending so much time reading about stuff, which I still do and I still enjoy, but I started then to write my own stuff about it. And if people read it, great. If they don't read it, I still feel better. My mental health, for want of a better word, is much stronger, but I just enjoy it, and it's never a bind for me. It's never a struggle. I never have a moment's block. In fact, what stops me writing faster is I can't type very quickly. If I could type quicker, I would write quicker. So I'm very lucky in that sense, but I do think it's because I'd spent so many times, as all academics do, I'd written exam papers, I'd written curricula, I'd written rule books, I'd written endless minutes of meetings, God knows how many emails, 100 emails a day I'd written. And I didn't hate all of it, but that's writing for a purpose. As soon as I had the chance to write for myself, I just felt this relaxation, I felt this release, I felt this opening of a dam of words that I could then write and subsequently say at Guerilla Cricket and now on podcasts. And, my life is enriched because of it. So going back to your question, what do you need, chicken or egg? I think you need to find what is your creative outlet. And then when you've found that creative outlet, then pursue it. Don't apologize to anybody. Don't think I'm not good enough. Don't think this isn't for me. If it is what you want to do, even if you're the only person who reads it, you'll still get an enormous amount of satisfaction. But I also promise you something else. If you read it and you like it, I guarantee that someone else will like it, and probably a hell of a lot of people will like it. So find your creative outlet, practice it, have the humility to understand that some things will work and some things won't work. Your voice will come, and then as your voice comes, so will the pleasure, and with the pleasure will come readers and will come other opportunities. So that would be my answer to the chicken and egg.
Wonderful. On that note, Gary, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure for me. Thank you for listening to my torrent of words.
Hopefully, it will leave readers with some ideas of their own and some questions of their own. Well, which is really the point of this whole thing,
Well, if I'm able to offer any advice or any views, if they contact me at Gary Naylor 999 on Twitter, I will endeavour to respond. I can't promise to answer every question. I can promise to read them, and I can promise to give of my best with any advice that I'm able to offer. I'll be delighted.
Yes, I'll certainly add your Twitter. I usually do add the guest's Twitter handle in the show notes, and I'll certainly do that. Well, I think this has been fun.
Yes, so do I. Thank you.